Hey, this week we have Bobby Kim on the podcast, aka Bobby Hundreds. You guys may know him as the founder of the Hundreds, a streetwear community-based brand that's beloved by people across the world, including celebrities like Jay-Z, Jonah Hill, Jamie Foxx, and many more. And it was probably the most relatable podcast I've had the opportunity to do because of the fact that Bobby, is our first South Korean guest on the show. Of course, we've had Yeonmi Park, who was the first North Korean guest on the show. But we just had a lot of fun talking about some of these things that are perhaps just more relatable to speak to, given the cultural alignment of, some of the things that you have to go through as an Asian American male, as an Asian American in general. And we just got into a lot of the deeper topics that I had a lot of fun chatting about. So I really hope you guys enjoy this episode. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, make sure you give it a like, share with a friend that you think would also like it. Same goes for people that are listening to this on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Give it a 5-star rating. This really goes a long way. And even if it's just a few seconds, I really appreciate you guys for spreading the word. So I hope you guys enjoy this podcast with Bobby Kim and myself. Bobby Kim.
I'm here.
Kim squared. What's going on?
I'm here. Bobby Kim, Sean Kim. We're doing it.
Do you prefer Bobby Hundreds or is it Bobby Kim?
I don't even know at this point in my life anymore. For the longest time, I had been pretty good about differentiating between Bobby Kim and Bobby Hundreds. And Bobby Kim was, Bobby Hundreds was reserved for work and for my art. But now they're just kind of interchangeable, and my kids will joke around sometimes like, hey, Bobby Hundreds, and like, okay, like, what is the difference really? The work is so much a part of my life and identity at this point that it's just like, I guess they're the same.
Yeah, I mean, when I first discovered you, I was like, maybe Hundreds is his last name. And I did the reverse. I was like, maybe he named the company after his last name, which is why it's called the Hundreds. So he's like a half Asian. I was like, duh. And then I'm like, oh, nope, fellow Korean.
Yeah, just 100% pure Korean. I adopted that name from the brand because of a lot of the punk bands I grew up listening to. It was kind of common for band members to do that. There was a band called 7 Seconds in the hardcore, post-hardcore scene. And the singer Kevin, he used to go by Kevin Seconds. And that was partly inspired and derived from the Ramones, and Johnny Ramone, Joey Ramone, like everyone just took that last name. And so that was just kind of a thing. Like if you're from a band, like that was just your surname. And so I wanted the same for us. So much of what we modeled the company after was emulating and acting like we were a music band. So I was like, if we are the owners and the founders of it, and anyone in the community can adopt the surname as well, like we're all family.
Yeah. I've seen that a lot in like streetwear, like Echo. I guess Mark Echo named the company after himself, or in fashion in general. I guess a lot of founders are so embedded into the brand.
Yeah, it is just a part of them.
Huh. Hey, by the way, I'm trying to think. If my memory serves me correct, I think you're the first South Korean to come on the show, which is crazy.
You haven't had many North Koreans on the show?
I had one North Korean on the show. Have you heard of Yeonmi Park?
No, should I?
No, I mean, she's pretty well known now, but she has like a TED Talk that I think she's done. Basically there's a lot of North Koreans that escape North Korea and they tell their story, and she's like an activist now, and she does like public speaking gigs. She wrote a book called um, a girl's journey to freedom, or North Korean's journey to freedom. And she talks about her story of like escaping North Korea to China and then China to South Korea. Like, it's crazy the shit that she's gone through.
Yeah. Well, I'm honored to be the first South Korean. There was a kid who was here yesterday. He stopped by to visit. His name is Jung-woo. He's got a brand called Hu Jung-woo. It's kind of coming up right now in the LA streetwear scene and just, I guess, beyond there. But he's from Baltimore originally, and he was sitting down telling me, he's just like, bro, like, he was just like, hey, it's really nice to meet you, because when I was growing up, there weren't a lot of Korean Americans to look up to, especially within the space. And all the kids from our neighborhood that were Korean were like, whoa, there's like a cooler Korean guy out of LA that is just kind of like, you know, blending into this streetwear universe and like kind of leading the charge. And he's one of us. And he was just like, that really meant a lot for him. He's like, because out in Baltimore there's like a lot of racism. It's not like LA where you guys are integrated and, you know, you're represented a little bit better. He's like, out in Baltimore, there was no representation. Like, you do not get picked on the basketball court, regardless of how good you are. Like, everyone is racist against you in the way that you speak. And so he's just like, it meant a lot. And I was like, and he was saying it with such, he really meant it. And I was like, you know, some people, I hear that some kids will be like, dude, it means a lot, dude. You're Korean, you're Asian, you're repping. And I'm like, cool, thanks. And he was saying it was like a really transformative thing for him. And it just made me contemplate, you know, how important that would have been for me to have Korean American or Asian American role models that I could look up to, that were represented in spaces that I wanted to participate in. You know, when I was growing up, there was just a handful. There was a guy named Daewon Sung, who's like Korean American skateboarder, who still is amazing to watch, but just like not a lot of us out there. And I remember as a kid going like, I want to lead the charge. Like, I want to hold bear the flag so that other Korean Americans can be like, I can do that too. And so it's not just me. There's so many other Korean Americans that I think are doing it right now and doing it really well within entertainment and food and tech and all industries. And so I have two boys who are 8 and 11. When I speak to them on what they want to do in their careers and in their futures, they're like completely open. You know, whereas for me, it was like, here are the paths. You can get like a secure government job. You can go into medicine. You can be a lawyer. Like, that's where they'll take you. You know, otherwise you can be like a sushi chef, you know, taekwondo instructor or something like that. And I was just like, I guess I'll never be an actor. I guess I'll never be an artist. I guess I'll never be a musician. But then, you know, look at what we have now. It's amazing. Like, my kids are like, I want to be YouTube, you know, personality, and like, I want to be a chef. I want to be, and I'm like, you can do whatever you want. Like, we're everywhere now. So, short story long, like, it's really cool to hear that people, like, I was able to do that for one person, but more so the fact that there are so many of us out there doing it. Like, even this kid that I was talking to, this guy, I was just like, dude, now you are that for the next generation. And so, like, we just need more of us out there, more of our faces out there. There's a big portion of the brand's life where I never showed my face, because I honestly just don't like showing my face. But after my kids were born, I remember after my first son was born, I was like, just looking at him, I was like, you are a full Asian American male growing up in America in this day and age. And I want you to grow up with your head held up high and proud of your heritage and proud of what you look like. And I need to help contribute to what that meaning is. I need to be a part of representation, you know? So I intentionally put my face out there. I changed my avatar so it's a picture of my face, Like I started being, because I am always behind the camera, and I was just like, I'll be in front of the camera for some shots. You'll see me over and over again. So it's just like, he's Asian American. Because for the longest time, people are like, he's white, or like people thought I was like a black
Yeah.
guy for a long time, like you thought my last name was actually Hundreds, and so like I was
Yeah.
Caucasian, but like I was Korean American the whole time. A lot of people didn't know. And I was like, man, I probably could have helped out a lot of Asian Americans, but I also probably could have just helped change what the image is of an Asian American for non-Asians.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's what I love the movement of the hundreds, but for me personally, what I love is that there's this successful brand or movement built around like a cool Korean that I can relate to.
Yeah.
And, even me, I didn't have that growing up. Maybe there was Jackie Chan or Bruce Lee, and, there's certainly even Asians in general, right? So there wasn't anyone, even in business, particularly in this setting, that I had to look up to. Was that the same for you? Like, who were you looking up to for inspiration when you were starting the hundreds, or even when you were a teenager growing up?
Yeah, there just weren't many. I mean, as far as identity goes, there weren't many people who look like me, but I think there were a lot of people I looked up to because they felt like square pegs and were fringe and marginalized within their own communities. And so I was very much drawn and attracted to specific street artists that had started t-shirt brands around them. Much of streetwear as we know it today came from a lot of these graffiti artists and independent artists that were just looking for a canvas for their art. So like good examples of that are like Futura and Stash from New York. Like these guys started a couple brands, but they were foundational in the streetwear scene. Like Jest, this guy Rob Jest, who started a brand called A Life in New York, he still is like an amazing artist. And so I was really drawn more to that than, because I knew, I was like, there aren't many people who look like me out there that are doing it, that are building brands. For the most part, they're largely white. So guys like Sean Stussy, James Jebbia from Supreme, Rick Klotz from Fresh Jive, and Eli Bonners from Extra Large were probably like the more significant heroes and influences of mine. But I just was like, I don't see any other Asian Americans really doing it. And like, I want to be the one, and I want to be the one that, shows other people that it can be done. I wasn't the only one. There's guys like Jeff Staple who were doing it as well for Asian Americans. But just not a lot of us, and still not that many of us that get shine. So whenever I find them, like Hu Jung-woo, he is the Korean American guy. I'm like, I'm going to put you front and center because I want people to see that this is possible, this exists, and this is contributing to the larger streetwear universe.
Dude, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I know you grew up with like immigrant parents. So what was that like in terms of, navigating the career paths that you took? Because I think you said I read an article that you were in law at one point, but were they more like very conservative Korean parents? Like my parents like beat me. Like that's how conservative it was. Like at the age of 5, they would get the wooden ruler.
Yeah.
Even in school, I was beat. Because I grew up in Korea until I was 7.
Yeah.
So what was that like for you?
Same experience. Very traditional Korean immigrant experience. Same, like the exact same Korean dad that you're thinking of.
Yeah.
Then when I would explain it to my non-Asian friends, that would be like, like Kevin's dad in Wonder Years, like how he grunted, he just read his newspaper at the dining table. He was always unhappy and like had very little interaction or engagement with his children. That was my dad, except he beat the shit out of me all the time, And they're like, oh my God. And I'm like, oh, is that bad? Like, that's every Korean that I know, like that generation of Koreans just think of, and not to justify or explain away any of their behavior actions because it's reprehensible. But you have to imagine they grew up in essentially a third world country at the time, fully ravaged by war. They're like generations of family just dying early. Like, like just to survive was enough. Then they're like, I'm going to immigrate. I have to escape this place. I have to immigrate across the world where I don't know anybody. I have nothing in my pockets. I'm going to try to make a living for myself. They go through all of that. They get to America, and this is my parents' story, and then my dad is applying for jobs, and people are just berating him, calling him racist names to his face, epithets, and he just sits there and takes it. And then he has children, and then his children, who I'm a middle child of 3 boys, grows up and is just like, fuck you, Dad, I want to be an artist. Like, of course you would beat the shit out of that kid. You know what I mean? Like, having come from all of that. And again, like, not to make light of it, and abuse is like something I speak on often. And it really, that I endured so much trauma that I'm still rummaging through, through therapy and going through a lot of this stuff. And it really has determined so much of my outlook and course of life. But like, that's what they went through to get here. And then I'm like, I want to print T-shirts for a living. And they're like, what? I'm like, got all the way here and you just want to draw cartoons all day? Like, are you crazy? And so that was very much my experience, where I would be like, I want cable TV, Appa. And he'd just be like, go outside. And I'd just be like, my friends have MTV. Why can't I get it? I want Air Jordans. And he was just like, so toggling between the Eastern and Western cultures, especially, I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, especially during that time. Really, really interesting. But I always knew I wanted to go down a creative path. I didn't think it was possible. I'd always been told it was impossible, because that's how limited my parents' knowledge was of just how it worked in America. They were like, you are Asian American. These opportunities are not going to be there for you. Just put your head down, be a doctor, be quiet, be happy to be here, or else they're going to kick you out of this country. And I was just like, no. I'm going to be an activist and speak up and like tell the government to fuck off. And I'm going to go and like draw pictures because I want to just draw all day. And my teachers are like, this is not going to work for you. And anyone in the industry that I'd been looking up to at that time was coming around saying, hey, look, man, like, there's really no space here for you. And so the day that my partner, Ben, came to me and said, hey, as it turns out, we are making enough money now to pay the rent on this $700 studio that we were living and working out of. And I was just like, we're rich. We're billionaires. Yeah. Making $700 a month. Like, oh my God, like, now I'm free. And so I often get asked the question of like, when did you know you made it? Or when did you become successful? I was just like, nothing has felt better than that day, because that day I was freed. I was freed of being told I can't do this. I was just like, no, I can do this for a living. I'm doing it right now. I'm fully liberated. And that was the short story long again.
Yeah. I mean, it's a huge, I can relate so much in terms of what you have to go through with conservative parents and like being, there's a funny joke that Russell Peters talks about where he meets this like white boy named Kevin, and he was like 12 or 13, right? Do you remember this? And he goes over to Kevin's house one day, and then they're playing video games, and his mom's like, Kevin, dinner, fuck you, mom. And then Russell's like, what the fuck? He goes home, he tries that with his dad. Fuck you, dad. His dad's like, what? He like beats the shit out of it. That's exactly what I did, though. I was like 8 years old. I was like, wow, maybe this is okay. Yeah, it wasn't.
The best line, he says, do I look like Kevin's mom? Right?
Yeah.
Good. A lot of Russell Peters' early comedy, there's, across Asian American or Asian culture, everyone related to that. They're like, yes,
so relatable.
Yes,
I mean, could you imagine if you grew up in South Korea, and imagine like what career path you would have taken if you were there? I mean, you would have had to go to the military, right? There's like a forced military for 2 years or 3 years or something like that. and then studying from like 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. and then after school credits, there's like after studies after you get home at 10 p.m. and then you go into like the most competitive university prep. Oh my God.
I would have had a really hard time with that. And the older I get, I think about that. And when I travel back there, I think about it often. I would have had a really hard time because I'm just not built for that. Like, I'm a little bitch, and like being in the Korean army, the stories I hear, I'm just like, I would have just gotten punked. And then, like being competitive and like studying hard and stuff. I'm like, oh my, wow. Like, I would have just become like a custodian or something. I don't think I would have been able to excel in that type of lifestyle. So I'm really grateful. Thank you, Mom and Dad. Thank you for moving to America. Like, it really, like, the American dream is still a real thing. It's not exactly what it was, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, but it's still a thing. And like, our country is really amazing for that.
Yeah, I mean, we're super fortunate for just being able to use creativity as a career in general. I mean, all the things that you've got going on, I don't know if you can announce it, but all these super exciting announcements that you're going on, just, I mean, in Korea, I don't know what we would have done as a career path back in the day.
No, totally.
And are you like in the, because you were born in America, right?
Yeah.
So are you like a very, in terms of like culture and values and stuff, like, are you into like the seniority hierarchy that Koreans do, where you have to, like, you would be a hyung, obviously.
Yeah.
Like, are you very much into that, where like the older you are, you have to like really respect them no matter really, what they do or how they act?
The technical specifics of it, I don't think I'm very well versed in, because I don't even know how to really speak Korean, and let alone understand a lot of it. And so I just didn't grow up around a lot of Koreans. And so, and my parents were doing everything they could to Americanize me, get me assimilated into Western culture. So I wasn't aware of a lot of that language and rhetoric until I was much older. And so it had kind of, gone past me. However, I've always just been so big on respecting elders and feeling disrespected when someone younger, doesn't give me the respect that I feel like I did. Like, the respect thing is like still so big, and like the honor and the respect thing, like that, all the stereotypes of that are like, that's still like just so visceral within me, and probably, indoctrinated in me by like my parents and just like how they talked about respect and age and stuff. But it really has become a big part. At the same time, I wrestle with the fact that so much of what I do is subversion and being anti-authoritarian and being anti-establishment. And so like, there's also like this dissident side of me that, so I'm very much a balance of opposites always. Like, I love brunettes, but then I'm like, oh, I also love blondes. Like, I don't know, so I'm just like, I'm everything. And so, I find I'm usually somewhere in the middle of that, where I'm like, yeah, I believe in respect, but then I'm also like, screw them. Like, they don't know. And I'm all about breaking rules and starting over and break the rules again.
But there is something about when you see another Korean person, let's say, even Japanese, where that they understand the culture. There's a little bit like, there's a bit of an expectation there, right? It's just like, we know what's going on here. There's like an inner communication that goes on.
Oh, with around Asians, like, I'm very like, it's all deference. I'm very much like, especially if they're older, I'm just like, my body language changes, right? Like I'm just more humbled, and my shoulders drop, and my head is a little bit more bowed when I speak to them. As opposed to if I'm like talking to like a younger Asian kid, and I'm just like,
what's up? Yeah.
So that is hardwired in us, and there is something to it. I think there's a beauty to it, and a utilitarian and a usefulness to it that the Western world can learn from. I think there's pros and cons to like all cultures, and so like I try to get the best of everything and employ it within my daily life. But America is built on individualism, and like Russell Peters said, like kids refer to their parents by their first names here, and I will hire.
Yeah, that was a culture shock, man. I was like, what's going on?
Crazy. Like, remember
teachers too.
Teachers, exactly, or like talking back to teachers and stuff, and I was like, wow. But even within, I own a company, and like hiring young people and seeing like 20-year-olds come in and just feel entitled and like they belong there and that they've already earned it and they deserve more. And there's like a really frustrating, annoying part of that to me, because I'm like, dude, you got to earn your stripes, and you got to like work to deserve it, and you got to work for the recognition, and then you like get older and then you will win our respect. But then there's also part of me that's like, that is amazing that young people think and do that, because they don't care about what anybody else thinks or what the rules are. They just want to do it their way, and like, thank God for that energy too. A lot of progression happens by young people because they're like, no, I'm not going to abide by the gatekeepers. I'm not going to play by your rules. I have this saying that if you always play by their rules, they'll never let you win, And so young people, they come in and they think like that. They're like, I'm going to write my own rules, and it pisses older people off. But it's like, that's the job of a young person. Piss off the old people. Like kids ask me, they're like, hey, I'm starting a brand. I just want to know, how do I win the respect of the pioneers and the veterans? And I'm like, fuck them. Do everything in your power to piss them off. Like, do everything in your power to upset me. Don't listen to anything I'm saying. I'm old. I'm washed. I'm 40 years old. I've been doing this for 17 years. All my rules and my mindset, it's so antiquated now. You're 20 years old. You have a completely fresh perspective on the world. Like, keep me on my toes. Make me uncomfortable. Push me around to where I have to like abide by whatever it is that you do. And that's what the best younger brands, designers, artists are doing every single day. They make me uncomfortable, where I'm just like, oh, like I'll never be as cool as Billie Eilish, Like, I'm just be like, I can't. And it frustrates me, but that's the young person's job. Meanwhile, the young person is saying, how do I win the respect? How do I have longevity? How do I build a career like Bobby from the Hundreds or someone else who's 40 years old and washed? So like, we both want what the other one has. Like, I remember being 23 and going like, no one takes me seriously. I'm Asian American. I look young as it is. So they think I'm 12 years old. Like, nobody takes me seriously in the space. And like, I'm going to prove it. And now I've done it where I've like somewhat earned my stripes, but I'm just like, God, I was so much cooler back then, and so much more versatile and fluid and innovative. And like, I should have appreciated that,
Yeah, there is something to appreciate in the idea of meritocracy, of let the best idea win, let the best person, the best talent win. I mean, an example of this is, I think Korean Air had to change their policies because in like the 1990s, late 1990s, they had multiple fatal plane crashes because what would happen is they had this person of seniority and had a junior pilot that were flying together, and this junior pilot had this sense from his training that like there was no way that they should land this plane because it was super foggy. And because of, the seniority, in the end, he just let the captain land. And
even though I intuitively know it's wrong that we're going to hit this mountain, I'm going to, out of culture and out of respect and deference, I'm going to let him. This is a Malcolm Gladwell thing, right? This is
tell me about that.
Malcolm Gladwell wrote about this in it's either in Blink or Outliers, one of his books, like 20 years ago, like 15 years ago, 20 years. Oh God, maybe it's been 20 years ago that he wrote that. And that's what made people, because they were saying, why are there so many air crashes airplane crashes with Korean Airlines. And so he investigated it. There was also a follow-up piece to that. It's completely tangential, but Malcolm Gladwell got called out by being racist by the Asian American community and Korean American community. They're like, dude, why do you know, it's not just, that wasn't just the reason. There were other factors into it. But he was like really just making a point of like how much culture affects like our actions and our behavior and our worldviews. But yeah, sorry. That's like, as I was talking about, I was like, oh yeah, Malcolm Gladwell wrote about that. I remember that piece in his book.
Yeah, it might have been from his book. Yeah, I think that's where it was. But it does affect you a little bit. But at the same time, you went through so many struggles. I mean, you had to really grind it out. There wasn't social media that you could leverage as you know the kids today can leverage. So you really had to grind and hustle and network and add value to relationships that you had. I mean, talk to us a little bit about some of the most difficult struggles that you had trying to get the hundreds out into the world and trying to get your brand out there and differentiate from the place.
Well, to be honest, I think kids work much harder today. I think everybody works harder today. I believe that we are all working twice as hard for half the money these days, you know, because just from how wealth is aggregated in more tighter circles. And so, yes, we worked really hard before social media, but the work was so much fun. You know, I really never looked at it like it was grueling or unpleasant. I mean, there were stressful moments and there were hard days, but pre-social media, so this is early 2000s, much of how I communicated with our community was through the blog. And this might seem just secondhand to people these days, that a person who starts a brand goes out and starts documenting what they do and then posts and shares it with their audience. This was completely alien and foreign in 2003. You know, by the time we started running this brand, like people, if you bought from a clothing company, you didn't even know who owned it. You didn't know what they believed in. You didn't know what they ate for dinner or who their friends were. You just blindly bought it. It was a walled off garden. You know, it was just like, that's the company in there and I'm going to buy their product. I'm going to have no interaction with them. And there's a purveyor and a consumer and that's it. And again, having grown up in the punk scene and in the hardcore scene, many of these shows I would go to, they would take place in basements, independent warehouse, like underground warehouses. Sometimes there wasn't even a stage. You couldn't tell who the singer was and who was in the crowd because the singer would be moshing in the crowd with everyone else. Other people would grab the microphone and sing the song for the singer if the singer got knocked out or he lost his way. And so I was like, this is what I love about punk and hardcore, is that if I go to a show, it's a community. I feel like I'm really a part of the band. Even though I'm not the one writing the music, I can sing along and for one night feel like this band belongs to me. And every other concert I go to, the music I listen to on the radio, the top 40 pop songs, you go to a concert, it's in an arena, there's a pop star on a stage high above you. They don't know you. You'll never be able to touch them. You won't be able to grab the mic and sing along. It's very much of this divided experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so can there be a clothing company that simulates what's happening within a punk show, where we are just the same as a community? We are also just fans of, like, I'm a fan of the hundreds, you know, like when I go out there and I see someone wearing it, I don't look at it like, yeah, I made that and like that's mine and he's supporting me. I look at it like, man, I love the hundreds too, just like you, you know. And I'll tell kids that and they don't even know who I am. Like, dude, I love that sweatshirt. They're like, yeah, me too. And I'm like, yeah, dude, we're all a part of this community. We're all a part of this family together. And so that was the mindset going into it, was, you know, can we create a brand that feels like a band, that you know everything that they're about? And I'm like, how can I communicate this? Well, in the punk community, we had zines. With the internet starting up really by the late 90s, Blogspot launched in 1999. I started a blog at that time. So I was like one of the first blogs. I was 19 years old and I was like, I'm a writer, I'm a photographer and artist. Where can I put up all this stuff where I don't have to, again, abide by gatekeepers? No major publisher is going to take what I'm saying seriously. No gallery is going to host my art. But if I put it up on the internet where it's free and democratized, like everyone in the world can have access to it. And so I started blogging, gained a little bit of traction, and we start the company, and I was just like, this is it. All the pieces that we make, I'm going to talk about the designs on the blog. I'm going to take you through the process of making a shirt. When we go into a store, I'm going to tell you what happened in the store. So everyone's along for the ride. There is no, oh, Bobby's the owner, he's going to just sell you this stuff. It's just like, man, like when something great happens to this company, you're going to know about it as it's happening with us. When something devastating happens, a friend dies, we lose some money, you know, like t-shirts come out and they're printed wrong, like we can't even sell them to you. I'm going to tell you, you're a part of it. So this entire generation of young people that got into the hundreds with us from the start have felt like it was a part of their life too. Like I'm, again, 40 years old now. I still meet people who are my age or even older who are just like, man, like this memory is like, I associate my childhood with this memory and this memory. And when I turned 18 and a girl broke my heart, I remember like I went out and bought a sweatshirt and I still think about that sweatshirt. And it's like, it's all one cohesive experience that we all lived through.
Wow. And was that the hundreds.com/blog? Like it was part of the website for the hundreds, or did it start as a blog and then you turned it into
It was just
the hundreds.com.
When you went to the hundreds.com, it was just my blog. And for many years, people were kind of confused because they were like, so many people either knew us for the clothing because they would go out into the world and visit boutiques and cool stores and they'd see the clothes. But if you went to the website, it was a blog, and the blog was getting, at that time, which was insane, over 1 million unique readers a month.
You're kidding.
Many regards, it was the biggest fashion website on the planet. It was like bigger than Gucci, because Gucci and Louis Vuitton wasn't running a blog. Like they weren't updating their website every day. They were just static pages with like a stockist list. And I was going in there 6 times a day, just like revamping the HTML, like breaking the code down, like there wasn't even really a WordPress type of entry.
What were you using then?
I was literally going into the HTML and just breaking it and like writing the code. Like my blogs were in the HTML code.
So it's just like a text edit file almost. You just like the note styling, nothing like that.
Yeah, 100%.
Oh man, that's so badass. If I wanted
a word to be bold, I'd do the B, NB, and like, href for links and stuff like that. I would just code it. I would code my blogs. And many of us had to do that back then because we were just like, how do we do this and make it easy and fun and just like be quick with it? And no one was thinking of doing that with their websites. Again, I know it sounds strange to most people who are younger, but like websites were just websites. Like you updated it like once every 6 months. It was like a storefront window. It's just like you don't change your window every day. Like imagine if every day, like I have a store on the corner of Fairfax and Rosewood here in LA. Imagine if I went up to that window every day and put up a different piece of art, a banner, for a sales sign. I wrote a little essay. Like that's what I was doing every day, just constantly changing. So people are like, I want to go back to that website and see, I trained them so that they knew every night at 2 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, I would post a new update every day for 10 years. Like I would be in the hospital. My son was being born and I was still like putting up entries. This is what I did today. This is what I'm thinking about. This is the music I'm listening to. New Year's Eve, Christmas, like traveling. I would be jet lagged. I remember we'd be partying in Vegas and everyone else would just be like knocked down in the room, sleeping on the floor, drunk, passed out. And I would be like half sober, half awake, going, oh my God, it's 2 a.m. in the morning. I got to post a blog, and like getting up and just like literally writing like this, like falling asleep. And the next morning going, I don't even remember writing that blog. Like there's so many entries like that. But
and it's just about your story of, it's almost like it's literally like a vlog, but it was in a text blog, technical format, but it wasn't about design. It was really about you and the daily life that you were leading. But people didn't know what you looked like.
They didn't know what I looked like.
You were just
which probably helped because everyone could put themselves in that in those shoes,
Right.
Like maybe it would have been alienating to see like an Asian guy like I can't relate to this, but I was just like, it's not about me. It really wasn't about me. It was like my opinions and like my take on everything. But I was just like, I would get invited to, and I still do, like I have a pretty fun life. I get invited to just do weird things. I'll go on a private jet, or I'll, stay in this like crazy hotel, or get flown around the world. And like, I think it's really exciting. But for me, it's only as exciting if I can share it with other people. That's just, I'm a sharer. So I'm like, that sounds cool, but like, can I blog this whole thing? Sometimes people are like, no, you can't shoot this. And I'm like, I don't even need to go. I don't care. Like, the whole point of it is that I can take everyone with me and be like, dude, this is sick. Like, can you imagine this is happening? Like, I would write that and everyone would be like, this is amazing. I'm like, I know, like crazy. So that was,
it's so true.
Still the ethos, still so excited and passionate about everything that we're doing and making. And so when I talk about it, people can really feel the enthusiasm about it. Like, I really care about everything that we do. It's just me. It's me, like, sitting here drawing, like taking notes, like all day long, and like, I want to do this and do that, and getting to just live out loud every day.
Yeah. I mean, man, 1 million unique visitors. That's crazy, even for today's standards, with everyone being on the internet. Do you remember like a key point of whether there was like a tipping point of just the amount of people that were visiting, or was it just consistent grinding, putting up every post at 2 a.m.
The biggest milestone,
long enough.
The biggest milestone, and this is, I'm going to plug my book, but I have a book, and I talk about this in the book. I didn't look at my stats. Google Analytics wasn't even really a thing in the early 2000s, so people just kind of blogged blindly. There was a time when all of your social output was not quantified and tallied in numbers. There was no gamification or scoring system associated with any of this. People were making art just to make it and to share it. It was very much like singing in the shower. So it was pure. Like, I would just look at my screen, post, send it out, the transmission. And in my head, I was like, maybe 1 or 2 people are going to read what I say. I don't really care. Like, this is how I'm feeling. This is what I did today. And whoever sees it, sees it. And it was a black box. And one day I said some insulting things about Pharrell, because Pharrell was doing this thing with like skateboarding, and me coming from skateboarding at that time, skateboarding kind of had a different meaning, and there was like a code to it, and you really, again, had to earn your stripes. And Pharrell was a big music star, like huge producer already, like very famous, and skateboarding was a subculture, and he was just like, now I'm getting to skateboarding, and I had thoughts about that. And this is me just, like 23 years old and not having much foresight, and thinking like, no one's reading this anyway. And like, this is how I feel about Pharrell. And the next day, one of the shops that we sell to here in LA called Brooklyn Projects, the guy who runs it is a guy named Dom, who's still one of our oldest friends and big brother to us. And he was just like, hey, like, Pharrell didn't like word is, I've had some of the guys stop by, and Pharrell's not happy with what you wrote. And most people would be like, I think, like, either defensive or just like, oh my God, like, I feel bad, I'll take it down, or something like that.
Sorry to cut you off, Bobby, but how did Pharrell even find out about the post?
That's the question. This is the question, because I was like more concerned with, wait a minute. Okay. I know I wrote some dumb shit, but did you say Pharrell read the blog? And he's like, yeah, because, he reads the blog. Like, everyone reads the blog. And I was just like, wait, how many people are actually reading this blog? So imagine if you sat at your desk every day and you wrote a message, you put it into a bottle, and you threw it into the ocean every day. That's exactly what I was doing with my blog. I was just writing letters, throwing it into the ocean, going like, I don't know who's going to read this. I don't know how far this is going to go, but this is just how I feel. Again, no likes, no comments. Like, this is just not how the internet worked back then. So I'm throwing messages out, and imagine Pharrell brings the bottle back and is just like, what was this about? And you're like, how did you find that? And so that was the day I went home, and my partner Ben and I was just like, we have to check the stats out on this thing. And that's when we realized, oh my gosh, there's over 1 million readers that are looking at this blog every day. And
my
we
God.
started traveling a lot at that time. And I remember I would go to Japan, or I would go into Paris, and I would just like walk into a store in Paris, and the guy would look up from behind the computer, and then he would look at his screen, and I'd be like, "Oh my God, you're reading my blog right now." And they'd be like, "Wow, like you're here in Paris." Our competitor stores, like I'd be at Supreme on Fairfax, and I'd walk in, and they're like, "Oh, we're on your blog right now." And I'm like, this is amazing. Not many people had blogs back then. It's not, again, like no one was there. There were just a few content creators. Most people just consumed, right? Like most people were not writers and artists and photographers. They weren't used to generating content, let alone publicizing and sharing it with the world. So in the blog days, there were just a few of us out there. It was my blog like that, and then Hypebeast started around the same time, but Hypebeast wasn't a narrative blog like mine. And so for that style of blog, like I was pretty much the leading voice within that genre in streetwear and street culture. And so as that industry was starting to blow up, they had to read my blog to be on the front lines of everything that was going on. Nobody was updating as much. No one was getting the access. No one cared to share the story as much as I was doing. And so of course Pharrell found it. Of course everyone was reading it. And now to this day, the biggest celebrities will come to me and be like, "Dude, I used to read your blog every day." I'm like, "You were?" Like, oh my God, like people that I admire, And so that was really the magical part of the internet back then. And so much of the mystery and the mystique is gone now, because it's all so transparent. Like, exactly who. There's a singer named Cat Power that I used to really love. She direct messaged me today because she was just like, "Hey, like, I love what you do. Can I get something from you?" And I'm just like, that's amazing. But like, perhaps it would have been just even more magical if I never knew that. And I just saw her.
You saw her at a cafe reading your blogs with a smile on her face. That would have been the magical moment.
She's just wearing this shirt, like performing somewhere, and I'm like, "Oh my God, how did she get?" And like, I just never knew. Like the never knowing. Like, isn't that so much of a crisis of like what we're living in, is that we know everything, or we think we know everything. We know too much. So we're self-righteous. We believe that we're geniuses. We believe we know more than anyone else because we have access to the information. But like, wasn't there something really special and unique about not knowing, about the black box, about the mystery? And so we made a shirt and a sweatshirt years later that said "Maintain the Mystery." And every now and then we reissue it. And it's something that I live by. Frank Ocean walked in. This is a great example. This Frank Ocean walked into our shop, because sometimes he hangs around our shop. And he's just like, that speaks to me, because that's like his whole MO is like maintaining the mystery. And like he's like seeing out with like Kendall and like Luca and like walking around in our shirt. But I was just like, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Like he exemplifies what I'm trying to say, is that like some parts of life like perhaps are better left unshared, and it's funny now, me being 20 years old, saying like, share everything I feel, I want the world to hear. But now I have a stage, a platform, and a relative audience. And so I'm like, I like that certain segments of my life are compartmentalized and just for me. I don't need to share it. Like I write a lot of poetry. I don't really share that. And it's not poetry, for anyone, it's for me. And hopefully it comes out one day and like you see it, but you're like, I didn't know. And I'm like, exactly, you didn't know. Like the not knowing. That's the beauty.
I feel like you have like your own little blog in HTML format somewhere on the internet there that you're not telling anyone.
I have, and even my partner Ben, my business partner Ben, in the hundreds, who's around me all day. I have folders of brands that have never seen the light of day. He's never even seen them. They're fully named. I've registered their domains. I've registered their Instagram handles, and they just sit there vacant. And I have designs. I'm on collection or season 3 of some of these companies, and they're just for me. Like they're just fully pet projects, garage projects that I don't want to share with anyone. Like I just want to exercise that part of myself. And I have a lot of writing like that. Some days I'll just sit there and I'll just write short stories and I wrap it up and I stuff it away. And I'm like, that's not meant for anyone else. That was for me. The hundreds is meant for everybody. And this is something that artists and brand owners and entrepreneurs have to understand, that the day that you start selling your product and putting it out into the world, you're sharing it with everyone else. It's not just yours. And so you cannot be upset when your brand starts taking a life of its own and it doesn't feel like it's entirely yours or it's not something you would do. You made that choice the day that you decided to share it with everyone. It is really not just yours. When someone gets an atom bomb, which is our mascot, if you get your atom bomb tattooed on them, the hundreds tattooed across their neck, people ask me, how do you feel about that? I'm like, that means something different to them than it does to me. For them, that might signify a chapter of their life, a really hard part of their life or an amazing part of their life, and that's why they got it. A lot of rappers have it because in the hood, getting the hundreds tattooed, the atom bomb is kind of like one of your initiations or like a coming of age tattoo. And so I don't know what that is, but I know that my brand means different things to different people. It's not just like everything I want, what I think. Everyone interprets it differently. And I have to be okay with sharing that. But if you want something that you don't want to share with anyone else and you don't want anyone else's input and you don't want to see anyone bastardize it, then just keep that tucked away, which I do. I have a lot of art that's really just for me. And that is as equally valuable to me and equally special as the hundreds or other public work that I put out there to share. They're equally valuable.
Well, hey, this is something we talked about off air, Bobby, but you made the decision. I don't know exactly. I guess when you said when you had your kid to switch from being the anonymous alias who was writing the HTML blog called Bobby Hundreds to really putting your face out there and really shifting that narrative for not only for yourself but for the brand, which isn't necessarily something that you're super maybe not comfortable, but maybe something that wasn't like your main intention when you first started the hundreds. Talk to me a little bit about the reasoning behind that and the decision that made you want to do that.
Yeah, so the world that we grew up in within the streetwear universe, in the early years, it was very clandestine, intentionally, very underground, where people didn't even want to talk about it. People didn't share where the stores were. Where did you find that shirt? I'm not going to tell you. You got to put in the work. You got to earn it. You got to earn it. A lot of stores, they really would not even let you in. A-Life or A-Life Rivington Club in New York was a good example of there was a camera and they were like, I don't even know if I'm going to let you in the store. We don't want to sell to everyone. We only want to sell to specific people. And so that mindset also carried over into how a lot of the brand owners were. They weren't interested in being famous or being recognized. It wasn't about publicizing their face. They really wanted to be known more for their art. It probably stems from a lot of the design coming down from just how the graffiti works. Graffiti is about getting up, plastering your name on the side of a train or on a freeway overpass. But it's not about how you look, because obviously a lot of it is unlawful. And so you don't want to go to jail. But it's just the glory wasn't about being recognized and being signing autographs. The glory was more just look how big my work is. And now the world knows who I am, but I maintain this mystery. Same how Banksy is on a mainstream level. It's just who is he? It's just it's not really about him. It's about the art. So the hundreds was very much based on that type of philosophy as far as our public portrayal was. Ben and I, we never really liked to show our face. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't also partly due to the fact that I'm Asian American, he's Iranian American, he's Persian, he's a Persian Jew. And there weren't people who look like us out there, especially as brand owners and founders. And we were like, are we going to be accepted or allowed into the space or understood if everyone knows it's an Asian American guy? Perhaps we should just leave this ethnically ambiguous so it's for everybody. And so for years, we kind of kept our face away. We would cover our face when we take pictures. And then there came, again, a point in time when my first son was born. And I'm obviously Asian American, Korean American. I've grown up being Asian American my entire life. I've never really reconciled with my racial identity the way that I have being a father. It was always a part of my life being Asian American, but it wasn't something that I consciously thought about or really tried to figure out. Like I understood my position in greater American society. I was a minority, and a minority of a minority, like I like to say. But it wasn't until I was looking at my full, my wife is Japanese American, so we have a full Asian American son, and I was just like, this child is growing up an Asian American male in our modern society, and there's a lot of blessings that come with that, but there's also going to be a lot of difficulties. And one of those is there just is not much representation for Asian American men in media, especially in the arts and film and television, but even in positions of power in companies, even in terms of ownership in companies. And so it is going to be really important for me to help solve that problem by putting my face out there, to letting the world know, hey, look, it is completely normal for an Asian American man to be running a company, to be on television, to be working on films, to be writing books, and it's normal like anybody else. And I will do my part in doing that. And so that day that I was looking at my son, he's just a newborn, and realizing that, I was like, I'm going to put my face out there. I changed my Instagram avatar, my Twitter avatar. It was just like a stoic photo of my face.
What was it before?
It would just always be something like obscure, like sometimes I still do it if I'm feeling a certain kind of way. It'll just be like, a lot of times it was just black, like just like a black square, black circle. And so I was just like, because I just didn't want I don't like, it's really, honestly, it's like great for the ego to be recognized. And sometimes it works out if you're at a restaurant, they're like, you can cut the wait list and like right here, Mr. Hundreds. And I'm like, sweet, that worked. But
Mr. Hundreds.
A lot of times it's actually kind of like inconvenient, like where you're just trying to like hang out somewhere with your family, and then someone's like staring at you, or like coming and you're just on a plane, you don't want to talk to anyone, and like, hey, like, so tell me about, and you're just like, sometimes I wish I just wasn't recognized. But so I don't necessarily love all that. I'm more along the lines like what I was saying. I'd much rather be recognized for my work. I love when people say like, dude, I love that book. And I'm like, that means so much more to me than someone who's just like, can I get a photo with you or something like that? And I'm like, okay. But that was a day. So that I, stoic photos of my face, being in the photos instead of always taking the photos, like, hey, can someone take a photo of me with Sean, instead of just like me taking a photo of Sean. My default behavior is still just to shoot the photo of Sean. And so like most of my Instagram is like not of me, but every now and then I'm like, I should post a photo of myself. So people are reminded again that this company is helmed by an Asian American, that the person who's saying these things that are not necessarily used to being seen from Asian American men is being said by an Asian American man. Because a lot of things I say can be abrasive or aggressive, really outspoken, especially on like the political, social level. And that is,
but we need that, I feel.
Totally. Because we have that to this model minority status for so long. And so I love when Asian American men, Asian American women also go out there and they just say something that is just like so aggressive, and anti, and, like pissed off, and I'm like, yes, like we need that, like that. We're not just this monolith of like, yes, okay, subservient, like, no, man, like we're all so different, even within our own communities, we're all so different. And like, I just want to contribute to that nuance. Like I'm slightly different from Sean, and Sean is slightly different. We're not all just, every time you see an Asian guy, like I know exactly what he's about. Like if someone sees me, they're like, honestly, like yesterday I surf in the mornings, and yesterday I was out and like I had this guy fully pull like a territorial localism thing on me. He's just like, and he thought he could just punk me around. And so much of me in my brain was thinking, just because of growing up in America, and especially the climate we're in, I was like, this guy probably thinks he can get away with this because I'm Asian American, or I'm an Asian guy. Oh my God. And they're like, this guy's not going to fight back. This guy's not going to say anything. So this guy's just being aggressive with me in the water. And so like, I just started pushing back, and then like, he was like trying to talk down to me, and I was just like, all right, let's go to the beach. Let's, and Oh,
Oh, it
okay.
got there.
Yeah, like, and the one Korean part about me is I have a bad temper, right? And so I'm just
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
yo, like let's go. And so that part, and I don't condone violence or anything like that. And like, thankfully, like he backed down, and I didn't end up with a bloody nose. You
Nah,
definitely
you
could
would have beat the shit out of him.
have. My Korean rage.
Your
No,
taekwondo.
that guy was really big. But what it does is lets him and everyone else know in the water around us that, hey, maybe next time I see an Asian American guy, like maybe he's not going to submit. And like that's something that, I feel like I can do just to go outside of the norm of what you would expect outside of the stereotype. If I can break your stereotype today, and it doesn't have to be like a violent thing, it could be like, hey, it blew my mind. Like kids hit me up all the time. They're like, whoa, like I grew up listening to hardcore skating too. But I'm like a white kid from Kansas. And I'm like, yeah, I broke your mind a little bit, like broke the stereotype of what you'd think an Asian guy is. Next time you see an Asian guy, you're not going to be like, oh, like he's karate sushi chef or something, a doctor, you're like,
For sure.
maybe he's into punk like me. Maybe he's into skating. Like, I don't know. And that's what I want to do to people. I want people to look at Asians and be like, I don't think I have them figured out like the way I did,
Particularly Asian Americans, man. I mean, we have a history of being emasculated. I don't know what the reasoning for that is. I mean, now it's getting a little better. You've got the John Cho's of the world. You've got the Stephen Yuns. You've got, I think you tweeted it, actually. I think I saw in an article. It was funny. I was actually doing the research of your story, and I was going through an article. It just popped up, and it was talking about Taylor Swift casting an Asian guy for one of her videos, and your tweet was embedded into this blog that was in, and I was like, no way, like what are the chances that I'm doing the research and amazing. I'm seeing this. I don't know if you saw that. It was a pretty big outlet, I think, but that's like, it's like a huge thing now. And BTS obviously is becoming worldwide, but in Mexico particularly, it's definitely changing for the better. But I imagine when you made that switch, 8-10 years ago, obviously was not an easy decision for you, because you had this success already blogging about your story as an anonymous character. So to break something that was already working is so counterintuitive. And also the fact that you weren't super comfortable, like your first instinct isn't to be out in front of the camera, it's to be behind the camera. So what happened when you started to do that? Were there backlashes? Was it more successful? What were the things what was the reception?
I don't know if I'll ever be able to quantify whether we got more success. I do know the company blew up like after that, but is it because I started showing my face as an Asian American? No. But the points of and there wasn't like backlash, but there were points of validation, and they still happen. Like I was saying earlier, this new up-and-coming designer in LA named Jung-woo. He has a brand called Hu Jung-woo. And, he's sitting there on the couch and he's telling me, hey, look, this is how much it meant to see a Korean American guy out there doing this. And it made me want to do what I want to do. And every now and then, not often, not every day, every now and then, an Asian guy will pull me aside and be like, bro, you don't know what that meant for me. And I'm like, thank you. Like, that one was for you. This was not for 99% of my audience or the world. Like, I'm doing this for you because you are me, you are my son, like I'm doing this for my kids. Like, we have to do this together, and just going back also what you were saying, just this history of emasculation in our country, a lot of it actually stems from imperialism. It has to do with war. Most of it came from fighting Japan, and America had to figure out a way to other us and turn us into the enemy. And so a lot of that language started happening. But before then, Asian Americans, there's a character named Sesshu Hayakawa. I don't know if you know about Sesshu, but the first Hollywood sex symbol in the 30s and in old Hollywood, Sesshu Hayakawa was a Japanese American man, first sex symbol. And he had love scenes with white women in movies, huge movie star. Pearl Harbor happens, Japan versus America in World War II happens. and the film industry, and you have to also remember the importance and the impact that Hollywood had on how the world perceived all cultures, right? Like internationally, Hollywood told the world how to think of everything. Now we have it different because we have the internet. A band like BTS can blow up, but back then Hollywood dictated the call, and Hollywood started turning against the Asian American man, casting them as caricatures, as sexless, as diminutive. And so now we end up with decades of that type of impression out there in the world because of Hollywood.
Oh, that's so interesting.
So now we are in this really amazing moment because we have the internet. Again, we don't have to abide by the gatekeepers. We don't have to abide by how Hollywood likes to tell it, because Hollywood still tries to spin that narrative, right? Like in Hollywood, in traditional Hollywood, still very rare for an Asian American man to have a leading role, to be a sex symbol, to make out with a white woman or a non-Asian person. Still really rare. A good example from my era was a movie called Romeo Must Die, starring Jet Li and Aaliyah. And Jet Li and Aaliyah are having this chemistry this entire movie. They never kiss. And everyone was just like, yo, like that would have been bonkers. Like they never kiss. Another huge moment, American Pie, the first one. John Cho, who's known as the guy who created the word MILF. There's a scene where he's making out with two white girls at a party, and every Asian American guy was just like, oh my God. That was like seeing an Asian American guy walking around with like a 14-inch dick, you know? You're just like,
yes, sir.
What is this? And so we are now in this really great moment in time where we don't have to, you know, Hollywood is never going to do it for us, because we are just not in positions of power in Hollywood. There's very few. There's like one, I think, Asian American executive at Paramount, but we're just not in positions of power. We're never gonna get it. Thankfully, the world doesn't just listen to Hollywood film and TV anymore. Now the world listens to the internet, and because we are so good at the internet, you know, the first generation of YouTube stars like Tu Wong Fu and Phil and all these guys, Asian American. Now you're seeing, you know, Asian American YouTube stars, like, and it's just completely normal. Like one of my favorite TikToks to follow is this kid, Sean, and it's called Sean Does Magic. You know, this Asian American guy just like doing awesome magic tricks, got 500,000 followers or millions of followers. And I'm like, this is already changing the impression. Then we have BTS. Then we have like more, you know, Hollywood now starting to catch up. There's a movie with Harry Shum coming out where he's like in a relationship with a white woman. And so Hollywood's slowly going to catch up, but we don't need them anymore because we got the internet. We got people like me. We got people like you. Like just the fact that you are running a successful podcast is significant. Like this is a milestone, you know, like a year, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, if I told you that, you'd be like, you know, like no one would take that seriously. Now they're just like, yeah, that makes total sense because Sean does it. Right. And so by the time I die and by the time my kids are older, I think they're going to look at a completely different world where, you know, all kinds of women are going to be flocking to their feet. Or men.
Don't you wish we just were born like 40 years later? You know, why couldn't we have?
I see a lot of like my younger Asian American homies that like are famous, and I just read through their comments, and it's just like all kinds of like women and men, and like just like, oh, like you're so hot, and I'm just like, damn it, like. We're always counted out, man. Like I was always like
2 more decades ago.
Yeah, I was always like the best friend in high school, you know, like with like the hot girl. Man. I'm like, I'm almost there, but like I'm Asian, it's not gonna happen. But now they're like, we love Asian men. I'm like, thank you for my kids. I'll just live vicariously through my kids. Like,
yes, sir. Yes,
sir. Fall in love with a million different kinds of people.
Well, this is crazy. We had Steve Aoki on the show, like in our early episodes, and I was talking to him about the fact that because he had his dad that just blew up, right? Like he had Benihana's, and he was like on Oprah, Jay Leno, back in like the 1970s, and was just like a ladies boy, ladies man, ladies boy,
lady boy,
and he was yeah, also a lady boy. Yeah, that's a sequel. But this guy was like breaking records, like trying to be the fastest man in the water, and just like getting girls left and right in the 1960s and 1970s. And I'm like, damn, man, like that's there's something to be said about those special people that are just one-off characters that, but this is the kind of things that you need.
Steve is one of those characters. I met Steve before either of us even knew who each other was on the mountain snowboarding when I was in high school. And there was one other Asian kid always. So snowboarding kind of blew up in Southern California in the mid 90s and was borrowing a lot from skateboarding at the time. Both of them were very underground subcultures. And I would go up to snowboard a lot. And there's just like, it was just all like kind of like, ratty kids, just like wearing baggy clothes, like not snowboard clothes, like just like going out there doing all kinds of weird tricks. And Steve was the only other Asian kid always in the lines with me. And I remember he had like bleached hair at one point, whatnot, and I just always was like, yo, there's like another Asian kid here. Like that's how rare it was to see Asians on snowboarding like that. Yeah. And so, that guy was always doing his thing. Like he was always doing his thing to stand out and to like break the expectations and stereotypes of what an Asian American is. And he's like a rock star for it now. I live next door to his manager, Matt. So like,
nice.
I'm always in reverence and revere what Steve's been able to do. There's just a few guys like that who've really done it well for the Asian American male community. Another guy's David Cho. There's they're out there. They're out there. And
Bobby Lee.
David Chang's another one.
In his own way.
Bobby Lee. Yep. James Jean, who's like, he's done this painting over here. He's like another amazing. There's some of us out there that are just really doing it and like paving the way.
Yeah. And how do you find when you're, given your lane, do you find that the hundreds is like very well accepted into other parts of Asia? Let's say even Korea, for example. Like, is it pretty well known in Korea when Koreans see another Korean man in Los Angeles, like killing the game? Is it pretty well received out there?
I've heard different things. We were really big in Korea. This is the conversation we don't need to get into, but we were really big in Korea in the early 2010s. There was like a window of time where we were like the biggest thing. Without getting too much into it, Korea has a really different take on trademark laws. And they are a first to file country. We are a first to use country. And so what that means is that if McDonald's, for example, has not filed registration in Korea, you can still go out there and register it and you own the trademark in Korea. And so there are certain countries that are still like that. We are first use. So it's like as soon as you start using it, you own it. You can go to court and be like, I was using it first, even though I never filed it. It doesn't matter. I was still using it. And so in Korea, this happens a lot. And so what a lot of Koreans do is they go around, distributors go around and they just start filing all the cool names of all the brands that are coming up. And then you're forced to distribute with them. And then when they're done with you, they essentially just own your brand. It's a disaster. So anyways, that was our relationship with doing business in Korea. But I've heard different things. Like I've heard, a lot of Koreans couldn't relate to me because I wasn't pandering or specifically relating to them. Like, again, like I don't really speak the language, But
language is huge for Koreans. Like if you don't speak the language, all of a sudden you're like a dirtbag. They just look down on you.
Like, you're like
the family,
okay, you're a disgrace. Which I get, like, sure. And so there was like a lot of that, and then there was just also, but as I've gotten older, I've heard stories of people are just like, dude, you were like a legend in Korea. So I'm like, I don't really know, So I also kind of like that. Like I don't want it. Business has this way of distorting your perception of things, right? Or favorite things. Like I will work with a partner, collaborate with them on something, and if they're really difficult to write, like I end up hating that partner, and I'm just like, what a way! Like I did the whole thing because I love that artist or that designer or that brand so much, but then like I end up hating them, and like I don't want to get into that territory with Korea where I'm just like, ugh, like like it's just such a special place to me, and it's my heritage and my roots, and I love going there, and it's just kind of blank for me. Like I don't get recognized really unless I walk into streetwear stores, but like I don't get recognized. Like what I do has not, they're like, I've never heard of it. And I'm like, cool. Like I love that. Like I just like being a blank slate here.
For sure. It's just such a fundamentally different culture in terms of what they respect and what they, look up to. I mean, talk about being the doctor, the lawyer, just being that brand that you guys have built with the hundreds. It's obviously a very special thing, but maybe it's just not as well, recepted in Korea because of that bit more of the close-ended mindset that we tend to have sometimes.
Might be.
Yeah. But hey, Bobby, I want to respect your time. I know you've got a really exciting campaign that you're working. Hopefully we'll be able to see it by the time this comes out.
Yeah.
But I just really want to thank you for your time. And we usually end the podcast here with an actionable step that we can take the listeners through, whether that is the entrepreneur that's going after their dream, the artist that's trying to get his or her name out there, maybe an existing person that is trying to take their business to the next level, whatever the situation might be. Is there anything that, maybe from your book or just in life experience that you've had that people can take into, or even an actionable step that they can take?
Yeah, I mean, there's many. I live by many mantras. I'm just off the top of my head, when I was graduating college, the only thing I really took away from it was that I realized the more I learned, the more I realized I didn't understand or know anything at all. And so that has pretty much kept me humble. And anytime I get ahead of myself and think I've figured everything out, I'm like, I think I'm just scraping the surface, and I need to be modest about that. I talk a lot about passion and patience in doing what we do, and passion meaning, retaining and cultivating like that heart and love. That's pretty easy. Many young artists, entrepreneurs have that. They're really passionate about an idea. But also the patience, meaning the discipline and the understanding that it's going to take time. And sometimes it's about waiting. And some things happen overnight. Some things take 20 years. And there are endeavors I embarked on 20 years ago at the start of my career that I've yet to achieve. And then there are bucket list goals of mine that happen overnight. And I will write about both of them within my book and dedicate the same amount of pages to both, but one happened in 5 minutes and one takes 15 years, and it doesn't mean that they're any less valuable than the other. And so being at this point in my life now, I can look back and take stock and realize that, everything is measured, everything has its way. It takes time for different things, but they all happen the way they're supposed to happen. And it doesn't mean that you're not like putting together a great story, so patience and patience and patience. I think it is going to be increasingly, and I say this because my impatience is my biggest flaw. It's the thing I hate about myself the most, is I'm a very impatient person. I can be an asshole like that. And I think it's only going to get worse as time goes on, just from all of us, because of how immediate much of our life is through technology. And so we do not want to give things the space to breathe and grow. We don't want things to happen organically and logically. We want to force things through because we feel like we are in the driver's seat. We're playing God and we want it to be the way we want it to be. But sometimes you just have to let things exist in the world and just like happen on its own. And you can only force things so much before it feels unnatural. And so, 20-year-olds are not going to understand what I'm saying because everything is urgent and immediate and you are not really looking ahead. My sons who are 8 and 11, when I try to talk about things that are even happening next week, they can't even process that. They're just like, what am I eating right now? What game can I play right now? But as you get older, you start really appreciating and understanding the long game. and how to set up the building blocks in order to get there, and understanding that the rewards that come from delayed gratification, or the rewards that come from the perseverance and the mindfulness of like doing everything exactly right and like building this incredible arc of your story and your journey, like it's so much more worth it than just like quick immediate hits, or like I just got to get this done, I'm going to force this, I'm going to make it happen. I'm just a lot more patient of a person, and the work has become ultimately better, but really my satisfaction and fulfillment out of what I do has become just even more enriched. And so passion and patience, everybody.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much, Bobby.
Thanks.
I highly recommend you guys to check out thehundreds.com, of course. Bobby's also the author of This Is Not a T-Shirt, which you guys saw during the interview. Where else can people find you online? Is there anything else that people should check out?
At Bobby Hundreds. If you are in North America, you can actually text me. My phone number to text is on my bio on all my social channels.
Beautiful. Awesome. Bye, everybody.
Bye.